Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do a tier ranking of 50 different new fantasy releases of 2023. If you are new and you don't know, I try to highlight new fantasy releases pretty often, at least once a month if I can, or more often than that, just because I know how much books can cost, and I know that accessibility is not the same for everyone, and some people, if they're going to take a chance on a book, they really want to ensure that there's a pretty high likelihood they'll enjoy it. And so I know a lot of us do anticipated releases videos, we talk about books we're excited about, and then sometimes it can feel like we only really hear about the really popular ones from those lists, and some of the lesser known ones kind of lose a little bit of their momentum. And so I like to really focus in on them. And on top of that, also for authors, it can make a huge difference to have a little bit more exposure. In general, I just really like highlighting new fantasy releases. That said, sometimes there's ones that I am almost positive I'm going to love, and then other times there's ones where I'm definitely taking a chance on them. I'm not sure, it doesn't really seem like my kind of thing. But in general, I end up having certain expectations. Sometimes they're met, sometimes they are not. And so I thought it'd be fun to do a tier ranking of pretty much all of the new fantasy releases I got around to from 2023. I want to be very clear that while I have a few in the bottom tier, I am not saying that that bottom tier is equal to a 1 star. There are going to be 5 tiers, and it's not 1 equals bottom tier, 2 stars would equal the second tier. It's nothing like that. It's just middle tier was kind of, if it's a series, maybe I'll keep going, maybe I won't. If it's at the bottom, it's very much a, I didn't really click with this, I didn't love this. And then the top, of course, is, oh my gosh, I can't stop gushing about this, and then everything in between. And all that said, let's jump into it. As always, with my tier ranking videos, I like to start from the middle, work my way out, because I like starting with the sort of middle of the road feelings and then going to the extremes. And then also, because I'm very indecisive, I can't do this in real time. I have to decide ahead of time. Otherwise, I will waste your time and I will spend way too much being like, oh, does this go here? Does it go here? In fact, in my notes, I have a few crossed out because I changed my mind even when I was all by myself and had no pressure of recording and like, oh, do I stand by that? Anyway, all that to say, starting with in the very middle tier, we have, I'm just going to go ahead and say, Tress of the Emerald Sea. So I did a Cosmere tier ranking, and that is where this one ended up falling as well. Not because I think Tress is just so middle of the road and it's fine. It's not, this middle tier is actually a lot of like, oh yeah, I liked this. I liked this quite a bit. But Tress for me isn't quite as high up as some of Sanderson's other books. I did a whole reread of the Cosmere last year. I mentioned that Cosmere tier ranking. If you're interested, I'll have that linked. And when I compare it to things like Way of Kings, or when I compare it to things like The Well of Ascension and The Hero of Ages, Tress is just not that like, oh, I'm so in love. And then I'm like, okay, well, is it in the next one? And I think about some of the other ones in the next one. I'm like, maybe not quite. But I really had fun with this one. I thought it was a really good time. I think it's a great book for so many different fantasy readers, whether it's somebody who is a voracious fantasy reader and they're looking for something that feels like a breath of fresh air. It's such a lovely, cozy, fun adventure story. Or if you're kind of new to fantasy or you're new to Sanderson, I think that could be a great place to start as well. It's rather family friendly. So much for Tress that it has going for it. It's just not one that really broke my heart or filled me with like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next? It didn't really have those extreme emotions. It was just such a lovely time. But I feel like I've been saying this in so many videos recently, but for things to break into my favorites, they tend to need to have the really extreme highs and lows. And Tress just kind of like was just so fun. And I'm gonna not take this much time to talk about all of these books. I'm gonna try to move it along a little quicker. If you are interested in the rest of these, I will have new fantasy releases wrap-ups linked in the description bar. That way you can hear more in-depth thoughts. After that, though, we have Spice Road. This is one that I considered not continuing on with this series, and I almost talked myself out of that, and now it's kind of turned into I might continue on, we'll see, because I did have a good time with this one. It was kind of this like desert themed adventure, not themed, it's a setting. It's a desert setting, and you're seeing this character who is trying to find out more about their brother, who they thought something had happened to, and now they're thinking, okay, is my brother actually alive? I thought it was enjoyable. I thought it was fun. I liked the adventure aspects to it. And I thought the dynamics between the characters was definitely very entertaining and engaging. It's just not maybe the most original story I've picked up, but I still ultimately had a good time with this one. After that, we have both Foxglove and Foxglove King. These are quite different from each other, and I always get them mixed up in my notes because of the fact that they both say Foxglove, because I'm dumb. So Foxglove is the sequel to Belladonna. Belladonna was like an unexpected great read for me. I thought it tackled grief in an interesting way. I think this author writes fantastic descriptions. I thought there was like this eerie, sensual darkness to this story that was somewhat reminiscent of Phantom of the Opera. And then in the sequel, Foxglove, I don't think it was any of what I liked as strongly as the first. I mean, it had a lot of the same components, but I don't think they were quite as good, which is why it's in this middle. Still entertaining, and I definitely am still curious what's going to happen in the third book. I just think we have maybe a little bit of middle book syndrome here. After that, with Foxglove King, I think the setting and the magic in this is so cool. It's more that the characters kind of annoy me. They have a tendency to fall back into obnoxious habits. So the good parts of the characters are the parts that I wish they would embrace, but it's kind of like whatever their weakness is, quote unquote weakness, or whatever their annoying trait is, it's like they keep going back to that, and I'm like, grow already. So for that reason, that's why it's not higher up, but the world and the magic and the lore I really liked, and I really liked the atmosphere. So I think I am going to keep going with this series. It's just not maybe one of the standouts necessarily of the year. From there, we have Nightbirds. Nightbirds did everything well, I thought. I liked the characterization. I liked the dynamics between the characters. I thought the way the characters kind of understand the world better as they are being exposed to more of it was really well done. There's just something about it that didn't quite stand out. And I think that part of it is just I read so much, and I read so much fantasy. So when I pick up a fantasy book, if it's a little bit if it does everything well, but there's nothing that pops out to me, then it's just, it's kind of not the book's fault to some degree. Like, I definitely would recommend this one. This is similar to Spice Road, one that I was thinking about not going on with the series, but I think if I see the sequel at my library, I will probably pick it up. And I don't know, maybe it will really surprise me. A lot of times first books in series, they have to do so much within the first book. They have to hook you, they have to engage you, they have to introduce everything to you. And if it's the first in a series, sometimes you really just need that additional time to feel the creativity with the author and the impact of the story. So we'll see, but in general, I thought Nightbirds was good. I just didn't feel wowed by it, but I would definitely still recommend this one if you've got your eye out on it. After that, we have Thornhedge. I thought that this one would definitely be a second or a top tier book. When I say second, I mean from the top, because I'm a huge fan of T. Kingfisher, and when I heard about this one, I was like, oh, grim fairy tale, back to what is my roots with T. Kingfisher, because I fell in love with her works through Nettle and Bone. It was good. I thought the commentary and the interpretations that you can pull from this were great. I just think overall it was not the most impactful, and it wasn't maybe the most interesting. I didn't think the characterization was as strong as some of her other works. From there, we have Combat Codes. So this one did a lot of things really well. And I think that the action in this is fantastic. It has some twists and turns, and it has a really interesting setting. I just don't think I felt as strongly for the characters in this as I would have liked, because there is a really touching, moving story, especially the backstory to the character Seago, and then also their relationship, the mentor-mentee relationship, has the potential to be one that I absolutely love. I just think within the first book, I don't see that as much. I do think I will be picking up the sequel, hopefully sometime in the first half of the year, and I'll see how we expand on this. Just to be clear though, this book actually was originally published, self-published, and then it was picked up and traditionally published in 2023. There will be another book on this list that has a similar publication situation. Moving on, we have Thorn Manor. This one I think of fondly, and I'm always like, oh, Thorn Manor, or The Mysteries of Thorn Manor, I think is the full title. But when I really think about it, I'm like, I think that those feelings are just more so that I'm happy to be back with these characters in this world, because I did enjoy Sorcery of Thorns. I thought it was such a cozy surprise, you could say, because it's kind of twisted and morbid, but then there is a sense of coziness to it. And I think a lot of my feelings actually come down to just, oh, I like these characters, and less so the actual story you get in Thorn Manor. To me, this felt like an in-between. I'm hoping, Margaret Rogerson is going to write an actual series with this world, and that this is the transition into that. And if that's the case, that would be fantastic. But this in isolation is just nice. It was just nice. From there, we have Unseelie. I thought that the representation in this story is fantastic. The plot itself is rather familiar, and as a result, similar to what I was describing with a few of the other ones, the plot being a little similar to things I've seen before, this kind of quest story, is why it's in this middle. However, I do think the representation is fantastic, and I liked dissecting the relationship between this main character and her sister. I like seeing familial bonds. As far as the representation goes, if you're wondering what I'm referring to, this is actually through the perspective of somebody who is autistic, and I really liked seeing how this character, how you see what is a traditional type of story, and how this character would navigate it, and how everything that is happening is affecting them differently than what you typically see in, not just in stories in general, but in fantasy very specifically. On Earth as it is on television is technically science fiction, but I wanted to include it on this list. This is one where if somebody purchased it and gave it to me as a gift, I'd be like, thanks, because I did have a fun time with this one. And I really like the idea of first contact, which is what this is kind of looking at, the idea of like, oh, if aliens showed up, how would we handle it? Except they don't actually make contact. They just like show up and hover and then leave, and then mankind is left to be like, what? So they know that everything is they now have confirmation that aliens are out there, but they don't know what to do with this, if they're a threat, if they're coming back, are they like, oh, screw mankind, let's leave. They don't really know. And then you're following all these different people, and you're seeing how this version of first contact has affected them. And then also, maybe this isn't first contact. You know, it's got that kind of feel. It's like, have they been here all along? And you're dissecting that. I do think that if you like the book White Noise, which I also read last year, and you're like, what if this was zanier and sillier and maybe less literary, On Earth as it is on television might be the book for you. A Curse for True Love. This is the third book in whatever the name of the series is. I don't actually know the name of the series, by Stephanie Garber. And I have loved how whimsical, bizarre, very nonsensical fairy tale leaning this series is. It feels very self-aware. It seems like it knows fairy tale tropes, and it just embraces them and messes with them and has fun doing it. And I have enjoyed that with this series. This third book, I thought, felt like, I just didn't think it was as good as the first two. It still had a lot of those fairy tale leanings, of course, and the kind of over-the-top writing, but it weirdly kind of went fast. I don't know what it was. Something about this one, it just felt like we could have had more time with it. I think I would have preferred if I actually wouldn't have minded waiting longer for this book to be released. I think it actually got pushed back at some point. I would have been fine with it being pushed back further and maybe fleshed out a little bit more and have a little bit more to happen. It really did feel like kind of, for those of you that have read the Folk of the Air trilogy, I'm not saying these are similar in their stories or anything like that, but I think that the way I felt about the last book in that series, where I was like, oh, I mean, okay, I guess it's over. That's kind of how I felt about the end of this series, where it just felt like truly the very, very end was just all kind of like that book. And I think I would have preferred a little more to have happened. The Will of the Many. This might be maybe the most unpopular, whoops, sorry, I bumped my elbow. This might be the most unpopular opinion on this list, maybe, I don't know. But The Will of the Many had such an amazing plot as far as the setup and the concepts that were alluded to at the beginning. I was so excited to get into those, to really dive into this world, to see the ramifications of this and how it affects all of society. I also thought the themes were really powerful and strong ones, and I was really, really looking forward to seeing how James Islington dissected those things. However, I do think that what we chose to focus on in this first book was not the thing. It almost felt like I was promised a certain plot, which I wasn't, but I thought we were going to get a certain kind of story and a certain kind of plot, and that we were going to explore an interesting, unique fantasy, almost fantasy sci-fi world. And then we kind of went into more familiar territory by having a character kind of infiltrate a school, and that is where you see a lot of the comparisons to Red Rising. So I was a little bummed. I almost feel like I had really high expectations based off of the beginning, and then those expectations were not necessarily, they didn't come to fruition, if you will. But I also think that we have a little bit of is it a Gary Stu or a Gary Sue? I always say Gary Sue, like Mary Sue. But I've seen other people say it's Gary Stu. But regardless, I do feel like we had a little bit of a problem with that in this, where the main character is just like so good at everything. And to a point where it actually made aspects of the book predictable, and I actually started to lose interest in a fair amount of scenes as a result. But then when it had its highs were great. There's a whole, I don't need to get into it because this isn't a review for that. And I did do a review for this. I don't know if the review will be up before or after this video, but I don't need to go into further detail. I just feel like this book had really great highs, but then the things that I was wanting more from, I really wanted more from. Last, for this third middle section, we have The Salt Grows Heavy. This is more like fantasy horror. It is exploring some fairy tales, and it's looking at those by also putting it under a horror lens, and then really analyzing how fairy tales have led to certain feelings towards certain character types, certain kinds of people, those sorts of things. I liked what it was going for. I also think of all the books on this list, this one might have the most impressive writing. However, I also don't feel like this is the most original thing to do. I feel like we get so many fairy tale retellings, we get so many mythology retellings, and a lot of them are doing something similar. And for me, this one just didn't necessarily stand out. I do think, though, that the writing is really fantastic. I mean, the kind of writing where it makes me feel really stupid because it's quite dense. I actually saw some negative reviews because of how the vocabulary is. A lot of people were saying it was like $10 words. You know, like there's just so many things in there. Every sentence, you're kind of like, what? What does that mean? Which I actually kind of liked. I liked seeing that, especially in like a fantasy horror leaning story, because I do think that that is a criticism of the genre, is that the writing itself isn't maybe as, you don't have those powerhouses, and I feel like this author is like, yeah, no, we can, and I'll show you. So I would not say that was a negative about this. I think that is a strength, and I think that's impressive, and I think it added to this overall dark, uncomfortable feeling in the story, and the unsettling feeling where you don't feel like you have a firm grasp on anything, and like in a weird way I think the vocabulary usage kind of mirrors that. But like I said, I just think if you're going to do a form of a fairy tale, grim fairy tale retelling, I'm going to expect it's just a very crowded subgenre, I'll say. Now branching out into the second and the fourth tiers. I have more in the second. I have a lot more in the second than I do in the fourth. So I'm going to list off a few that are all in the second category. We have The Magician's Daughter. I thought this was so lovely. It's exactly what I want from a coming of age story. I thought it was cozy. I thought it was great at the character being exposed to the horrors of the world, finding her place within it, and also familial bonds, and seeing the way that as you get older you start to see your parental figures differently. I just thought it did so many things so fantastically. Plus there's an adorable familiar in this that I loved so much. Then we have very drastically different City of Nightmares and its sequel Cage of Dreams, which I haven't had a chance to talk about, but these are so quirky, so weird, so morbid, and I had such a good time with this. I know that it is a little more niche. I know that its setup is not for everybody, but I really liked how nonsensical and dark it was. I thought it did that really well. I just thought it did nonsensical and dark mixed with funny really well. Really well. So for that reason, I was like, I gotta put these up here in the second tier. I just had such a good time with them. After that, we have The Sword Defiant, and this one might be surprising if you saw the video where I talked about series that I might DNF, because this was on there. But this first book by itself, and the themes, which are kind of what happens to our heroes after they have completed their quest, I thought it did them so well. However, there's a part of me that's like, do I need a sequel? I mean, the plot sets you up for more. So in that way, you're like, yeah, but what it was going for with its themes, I thought it accomplished really well in the first book. So part of me is like, I don't know if I want to keep going. But I thought that the writing was fantastic. I believe this one was also previously self-published. This isn't the one I was referring to earlier. I think it was previously self-published and then picked up. I thought the writing was great. If you're a fan of audiobooks, the audiobook was fantastic. And I really think it does some interesting things with the concepts you see in classic fantasy. Also, I am including some manga on this list because we did get some fantasy manga releases this year, and there's only going to be a few. The primary focus are books, but Yona of the Dawn, even though I think in comparison to some of my other favorites, maybe this is a little bit lower, I still just have such a fun time with Yona of the Dawn. It's always fun to come back to. It's always such a nice break from so many things. And to me, I don't know if other people do this, but when I'm doing things around the house and I just kind of need to shut my brain off and relax, I like to replay, these are my I'm coming home cozy sitcoms or movies or whatever. And I kind of like playing those sorts of things when I'm doing something where I don't really want to have to actually pay attention to the TV, like folding laundry or cooking or whatever. And in a weird way, that concept is how I would describe Yona, where I'm just like, oh, it's just nice. It's just fun. Anyway, so Yona of the Dawn's there. After that, we have, okay, so I feel like it's, this is maybe more unpopular than where I place The Will of the Many. Immortal Longings, I know it feels like nobody else liked this, but I had a good time with it. I liked the plot, I liked the characters, I liked the setting, and it was just different from a lot of things I picked up, even though it feels like everybody's like, oh, it's just the Hunger Games, because there is a competition aspect to this, and the competition's very brutal, and there is this idea of everybody witnessing it and everybody is seeing what's happening, and it plays a role in how you view the players, but also you can opt out. So I'm like, I feel like for that reason it's not, anyway, I don't feel like it's exactly the same. It's, to me, a little bit different than some of the things I've picked up, and I actually am looking forward to picking up sequel. It's not like it's a new favorite or anything, but I did have a good time with it, and I liked the kind of urban science fiction fantasy setting. Then we have House of Roots and Ruin. This is one that it seemed almost unnecessary to have a sequel to House of Salt and Sorrows, which is what this is. I actually feel like you could read this as the first book in this series if you wanted. You could start with it or House of Salt and Sorrows. I thought it was quite different than the first one, and I really enjoyed it. I found that I didn't want to put it down. I picked this one up before I went to sleep one night thinking, oh, I'll read a little bit of this and then I'll just kind of pick this up before bed throughout the week. And I read most of it that first night because I did not want to put it down. I stayed up late reading it. And I'm finding that that is the case with this author's works in general. I think it's kind of a underhyped author for me. She just has a way with how she tells her stories where I find I'm always engaged. And the way she mixes horror and fantasy together, I really, really enjoy. Last Tale of the Flower Bride. I would not have expected this one to be so high up, but I really appreciated the themes that were explored in this. I don't typically like abstract, heady, convoluted, is this really happening, magical realism type of stories, but this one is an exception to that. I thought that the writing was beautiful, and I liked the exploration of trauma and the effects it has on the mind. I think it did a fantastic job of that. Bumping back down to the fourth tier, a book I have not had the chance to talk about just yet, The Unmaking of June Farrow. This is my third book by this author, and I'm wondering if this author is just not for me. I like the way she writes. I don't know that I like the way she tells a story, and I don't think it's bad. I didn't hate this book by any means. I just also I finished it and I was like, well, that was a book. And I don't have negative feelings for it. I just don't really have positive feelings either. But I think it's good and I would recommend it. I would recommend her other stuff that I've read too. I don't know. There's every time I hear the premise of one of her books or every time I start one of her books, I'm like, let's go. It sounds like something I would like. This seems like something I would enjoy. And then I read it and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what it is. And I know a lot of people love her writing. So I really think I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what it is. It just they haven't connected with me. I think I like the feeling, the atmosphere that she creates. And I really think that the day-to-day things, there's almost a way of romanticizing them or making them eerie or frightening in a sense. But as far as the characters and the plots, I don't care that much. Anyway, so that one's in this tier. Back up to the second tier, we have The Weaver and the Witch Queen. I really like this one. Genevieve Gornichek is going to be an author that anytime she puts out a book, I'm going to look into it, because I have enjoyed both this one and Witch's Heart. I like the way that she seems to really know the lore that she's pulling from, or the mythology she's pulling from, and the way that she weaves a story around it, no pun intended. I think she does a great job. I really enjoyed this one. I liked the moral ambiguity, the gray morality that you see in this. I thought it was exceptional. Thorns Remain, very day-to-day historical fantasy, but I really liked it. I liked the commentary, I liked the themes. I actually liked the day-to-day, even though it made it a much slower read. But I think a lot of people will see Fae story, friends get kidnapped, now everybody is not glamour, but like everybody is convinced that like, oh, those people left forever ago, and the main character is the only one that knows otherwise. They'll see all those things and be like, oh, this is familiar. But I think it's what the author does with that kind of a story that I was really impressed by and taken aback with, because I wasn't expecting to love it so much. Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. I thought that the creativity in this was great. I liked the themes in this one. I really liked our characters. I liked the lore in the story and the magic in the story, and also the question of when your home and your safety is being compromised, do you then give up your own principles to try and protect other people? And I think that the author is exploring that really well. I'm really excited to pick up the sequel. It's only a duology. I'm a little nervous to see what happens in that second one, but I really have enjoyed this story so far. Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. I always describe this as being very cinematic. I felt like I was watching a movie. I could visualize everything. I felt the relationship between our character and her rock, or what is basically like this giant falcon eagle. And I felt for her. I feel like even though you go over a large span of time, I didn't feel like I was missing things. I just really enjoyed Untethered Sky. I thought it was a great fantasy novella. Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi. So fun. So truly adventurous. I can't wait to be back with this character. I feel like the way that she was written was fantastic. Her as a mother, her relationship with her daughter, her relationship with her crew, her relationship with her past. I thought all of that was explored really well, and it was just such a fun, campy ride. I had a good time with this one. Bone Shard War. This one, maybe if there was an additional tier between 2 and 3, would go there. I have loved this trilogy. The first one still remains my favorite. This third one had some aspects to it that, while in the long run I thought it wrapped up well, I thought there were some bumps in the road, but I still would highly recommend this trilogy. I think it's great. I think it's a great example of fantasy doing something different, but still being a great fantasy story with interesting characters, great relationship building, and a really unique world and magic system. Stolen Heir. I keep forgetting this came out in 2023, but Holly Black just seems to have a great grasp on how to tell a story that moves. And I don't just mean quick pacing, I just mean like there's always like the plot is always thickening and you're always questioning everything, and then you're like, wait, and then you don't realize you've already read half the book, but then at that point you're so engrossed in it that you feel like you have to keep going. It's just such page turners, and I care about the characters, but at the same time I'm frustrated with the characters. I just think she writes wickedness and gray morality within YA books in a way that I find really compelling. So I really, really enjoyed Stolen Heir. I'm really excited to pick up the sequel. I hope we don't have a Queen of Nothing situation. I didn't really like Queen of Nothing, but I loved The Wicked King. And with Stolen Heir, I've liked Stolen Heir, and I hope that the next one I at least like or love. I hope it doesn't fall off. And then for Tier 4, the last two, I only had 3 in Tier 4. So the last 2 for Tier 4, we have Stardust in Their Veins and Blackwood Library. I'm forgetting the full title because it's a long. The Last Heir to Blackwood Library, I believe. So I'll start with this one. I loved the beginning. I thought it was a great premise. I really was enjoying the atmosphere. I thought that was fantastic. But then the more we progressed, the unreliable narrator was used in a way that I did not ultimately enjoy. I think it sort of just made me frustrated with the main character. But I didn't hate this book. It didn't fill me with negative emotions. I just didn't ultimately really find that I enjoyed it either. Stardust in Their Veins maybe would be Tier 3 if it wasn't a sequel that I liked the first one quite a bit of. So as a result, I feel like I had expectations that were a little bit higher, and I really feel like not a lot happened in the second book, and it was kind of long. So it's kind of a case of middle book syndrome. I feel like, to sum up, that book had middle book syndrome. I hope the third book brings it home. If it doesn't, I mean, it's to a point now where that second book has really made me feel wobbly as far as my enjoyment of the series, that I'm not probably going to buy the third one. I'm probably going to check it out from my library, read it, see what I think of it, and then if I like it, then I'll complete the trilogy as far as like having it all together, and if I don't, then I'll take in the first and the second. I really hope we bring it home with that third one. That middle book, it wasn't bad. It just, I'm like, I feel like this needed to be trimmed, and I feel like we could have been more efficient and had more happen also. And I'm not even somebody who usually is like, oh, it's slow, boo-hoo. I don't mind a slow book. I just feel like this one, it was slow but unnecessarily so. Now to our fifth tier and our first tier. I'll start with some gushing. And I actually have a fair amount of manga at the top, because manga was a good year for me for manga. If you are interested in seeing more thoughts on manga specific things, or comics, video games, movies, adaptations, anime, all that other stuff besides just books, then I'll have my side channel Full Meta Analysis linked down below. But regardless, Girl from the Other Side, fantastic. I think this is so eerie and so weird and so strange and so convoluted and so heartwarming and so good and so sad. It's just so many different things all in one story. I absolutely loved it. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it is very firmly here in this top tier. I didn't even have to question. I loved it so much. After that, we have Engines of Chaos. I don't know if I need to say too much. I have hyped this series up a lot ever since reading and loving the first book. This is the sequel. I thought it was even better than the first book. It is epic fantasy as I want it done. I like the moral ambiguity. I like all the different perspectives. I like how I am constantly kept on my toes with the series. I don't know what's going to happen next. Feels like nobody is safe. And I really like that. I have really liked this series. Bumping back all the way to the bottom tier, tier 5. So, I will have done a worst of, so I don't need to elaborate too much. I might just kind of quick fire go through these, because I spent a fair amount of time on a lot of these in previous videos. But Sunlit Man, this could go up as I get caught up, meaning with books that aren't yet out in the Cosmere, but for now, I just feel like I read a sequel in a series that I hadn't read any of the other books in yet. So this one could change. Seven Faceless Saints. This one was just a case of the angst. Actually, this one and the next one, Chaos and Flame. The angst kind of took over what I thought were really cool plots. And I like angst mixed in with a good plot. I do not want it to take over the plot, especially if the plot is cool, because then I'm just like, can we go back to that? Like, why do we have to be like, oh, but they're so beautiful, or like, oh, but how I can't have this feeling for them because they won't feel the same, or whatever. I'm just like, fine, dissect that, but also solve this interesting murder. Or in this case, like, let's puzzle through what the heck your brother is planning in Chaos and Flame. So those two, just the angst. I wish we hadn't had them take over the plot. Let's just go through rapid fire the rest of these. How about that? Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. Do I need to say much else? I have said so much in so many other videos. I just think, I think the main character is dumb. I think that the stakes are really forced. I think that the difficulties in the main character's relationship are forced as well. Those are here. One for My Enemy. I don't like West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet plot lines. I didn't realize really that's what I was getting when I started this, and then once I did, I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to DNF it. Let's see, maybe this will change my current streak of I don't like these types of stories, and it didn't. It just continued to reaffirm that I don't like that story. Not really the book's fault. I actually like the writing. I don't like that kind of story. And then Frugal Wizard, Frugal Wizard's Handbook to Surviving Medieval England was fine. I mean, I didn't really care for it very much. But Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, going way back up, shooting to the top. I loved Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. So the Secret Projects, there's some extreme feelings here. Tress, you see, this is what happens when I do tier ranking, because I'm like, is Tress actually the second tier? Whatever, I'm going to keep it in the third, but let's just say Tress is like between, because it is fun. But Yumi, I loved Yumi. I loved the sci fantasy setting. I loved the characters. I loved the character relationship building. I loved them exploring their past, but also figuring out how they were going to come into their own and live in the future, like what they wanted for themselves. And I just thought it had my heart throughout. I really enjoyed that book. Divine Rivals, one of the best books, not just of the year. I think Divine Rivals is one of my new favorite books of all time. I don't think I know. And I also am putting Ruthless Vows in here, even though I read it so far in 2024. But it goes with Divine Rivals, so I am including it in this tier ranking. I love this duology. I think it's one of the best things I have ever read. The themes are explored wonderfully. It is fantastic to see basically journalists as the heroes, and I think it shows just how much is at stake when people are trying to show war for what it really is. I think the love story in this is beautiful. And when I first started it, I wasn't really on board with the love story. And then the more I read, the more I was like, oh, I love them. I don't want anything bad to happen to them. So I really loved this duology. I thought it was fantastic, and it deserves all the hype. Another couple of manga series, Witch Hat Atelier and Spy Family. I have talked at length about both of these. I actually do talk about these here on this channel from time to time, but over on Full Meta Analysis, I talk about these quite a bit. I love these, and Spy Family is just so much fun. It has an anime, and the anime is a ton of fun. If you haven't checked it out, highly recommend. Witch Hat Atelier, some of the most beautiful, whimsical art I have ever seen, and what the writer does with the paneling, and then also the way that some of these hard-hitting things are woven into a story that seems so innocent and pure initially, and how all of that comes together is phenomenal. I can't recommend Witch Hat Atelier enough. Threads of Power. I had so much fun rereading Shades and then jumping into this. I think V.E. Schwab is continuing to improve as a writer. I think that she trusted that we have patience, and that she could build this new portion of the story kind of slowly, and then really have a fantastic explosive ending. And I will say the beginning it takes a lot of time, but I think that build up is what made for a great payoff at the end. Bonesmith by Nikki Palpretto, so much fun. Loved the world in this. I thought it stood out among so many other stories that are about fae or mythology retellings, or it feels like building upon classic fantasy. This one is like, I'm going to do something different and I'm going to have fun with it, and I loved it. Encyclopedia of Fairies, speaking of fae done right, in my opinion. I thought the story was charming. I thought it was funny. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it was showing the differences in people's personalities, and when you're introverted and feeling left out, but also sometimes you like that, but then also sometimes it makes you sad, and it just did so many things so well, and I cannot wait for its sequel, which will hopefully, it'll be out right around when this video is out. Godkiller, not a surprise. I loved Godkiller so much. Oh, I just think, I know I always say this, but I'm just going to say it again because it's a great brief way to talk about Godkiller. If Geralt and Ciri were more of the focus in The Witcher, that's what I got in Godkiller, and I already like Witcher, so to get that in Godkiller, I was like, yes! And I'm just like, don't mess up the sequel. Just build from there. You can just continue at the quality it was, with the story, with the characters, with the lore, just like all of it, like just don't. I'm nervous because I'm like, don't tank. I don't think it will. I love it. I'm so excited for the sequel. And then The Crane Husband. This is one that I almost had in the second tier, but I thought that the way in which it showed domestic abuse is just so powerfully done, so well done, that I'm like, no, I feel like this very firmly belongs in the top tier. I thought it was fantastic. It's not the most enjoyable of reads, given the subject matter. It is not the most entertaining, but it is, I think, extremely important, and I think it's very eye-opening for somebody who's, if you've never experienced that in your own life, I think it depicts that situation exceptionally. Kind of a sad note to end on, but that's it for tier ranking 50 plus, or not 50 plus, but 50 new fantasy releases with a couple of like speculative, maybe sci-fi mixed in. I will say One for My Enemy was the other one that was originally self-published and then got published again in 2023. And I do want to clarify for Girl from the Other Side, I believe that its last volume actually released before 2023, but then there was a 12th kind of extra volume that was added, and then you see that in the deluxe editions, and that's how I came to the story. So that was released in 2023. But regardless, that's the official tier ranking. I'm very curious, what of these have you gotten around to? What were your thoughts on them? What are some that I didn't get around to in 2023 that you're like, you really should add this to your TBR? It was great. There's plenty that I like. The Art of Destiny I need to get to, He Who Drowned the World I need to get to. So there's so many others that I didn't quite get around to, but still feel free to give your recommendations. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.